The laughter cut through the bright afternoon like broken glass. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, careless, and cruel, floating over polished tables and crystal glasses as if the sun itself had decided to look away. In a restaurant flooded with daylight and golden reflections, a young waiter stood perfectly still, holding a tray with steady hands while a group of well-dressed guests mocked him in a language they believed he could never understand. They thought their words were invisible. They were wrong. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet strength, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Midnight Tales. Your support keeps stories like this alive. The waiter's name was Elias Moreno. He had started the job only 3 weeks earlier, walking into the grand restaurant every morning just after sunrise, tying his apron while the city outside buzzed with ambition and impatience. By noon, the dining hall filled with sunlight pouring through tall windows, illuminating marble floors and the faces of people who carried wealth like armor. Elias moved through the room with careful grace, aware of every step, every breath, every unspoken judgment. He needed this job more than anyone there could imagine. At table 12 sat 4 guests who looked like they owned the day itself. Victor Hale, a tech investor with an expensive watch and louder confidence, leaned back in his chair as if the world owed him comfort. Beside him was Corinne Blake, whose laughter sparkled but never warmed. Across from them sat Marcus Ellery, sharp-eyed and restless, and Nadia Voss, who watched everything with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. They spoke softly in a foreign language, glancing at Elias, smirking as he placed glasses of water in front of them. Their words dripped with mockery, calling him slow, small, invisible. They joked about his accent, his posture, his uniform, certain that the language was their shield. Elias heard every word. He had learned that language long before he learned how to carry a tray. His hands tightened for just a second, then relaxed. He kept his gaze lowered, his expression calm. Inside, memory stirred like dust in sunlight. He remembered another bright day years ago, sitting in a university lecture hall, sunlight warming wooden desks, professors discussing ethics, economics, and leadership. He remembered being Elias Moreno, top of his class, fluent in 4 languages, destined for a future that once seemed guaranteed. He remembered the phone call that changed everything, the accident, the hospital corridors flooded with harsh light, the weight of responsibility crashing down when his family needed him more than his dreams did. So he became a waiter. Not because he was small, but because he was strong enough to start over. The group at table 12 continued their jokes, growing bolder with each sip of wine. Other diners noticed the tension but chose silence, the way people often do in daylight when cruelty hides behind smiles. Elias moved away, serving other tables, the sun tracing slow arcs across the room as time passed. He felt the familiar ache in his chest, not of anger, but of disappointment. Not in them, but in how easy it was for people to forget another human being was standing right in front of them. What they didn't know was that the restaurant manager, Sofia Rinaldi, had been watching from across the room. She had noticed Elias from his first day, the way he carried himself, the quiet intelligence in his eyes. She had heard whispers from staff, stories that didn't quite add up. And now, she saw the way the guests laughed while Elias stood silent, dignified, absorbing the weight of their disrespect. The turning point came when Victor snapped his fingers, summoning Elias with a careless flick of his hand. The sunlight hit the table just right, illuminating the moment like a stage. Elias approached, heart steady, tray balanced. Victor spoke again in that same language, saying something particularly cruel, something about how some people were born to serve and never rise. The others chuckled, confident, comfortable, exposed. Elias placed the tray down gently. Then, in the same language, clear and fluent, he corrected Victor's misuse of a word. He explained its proper meaning, its cultural context, and how it reflected more on the speaker than the subject. His voice was calm, respectful, and unwavering. The laughter died instantly. Faces drained of color. The sunlight felt suddenly unforgiving. He continued, still in that language, not to humiliate, but to educate. He spoke about dignity, about how words carry weight even when whispered, about how character is revealed not in power, but in how one treats those who cannot fight back. He ended by thanking them for dining at the restaurant and wished them a pleasant afternoon. Silence wrapped the table like a heavy cloth. Other diners watched openly now, the room holding its breath. Sophia stepped forward, placing a hand on Elias's shoulder, her expression proud. She addressed the guests politely but firmly, informing them that their behavior violated the values of the establishment. They were asked to leave. No raised voices. No scene. Just consequences delivered in daylight. As the group gathered their things, shame clung to them more tightly than their tailored jackets. Nadia couldn't meet Elias's eyes. Marcus stared at the floor. Corinne's smile had vanished. Victor hesitated for a moment, something flickering across his face that looked almost like regret, before he turned and walked out into the bright afternoon, exposed and diminished. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed. But something had changed. Elias felt it as he cleared the table, as other diners nodded at him, some offering quiet smiles, others slipping generous tips onto the bill. One elderly woman reached out and squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with something like gratitude. Near the end of the shift, Sophia called Elias into her office, sunlight spilling through the doorway. She told him she knew who he was, that she had checked his background weeks ago. She offered him a position beyond the dining floor, one that matched his education and integrity. Elias listened, overwhelmed, realizing that sometimes standing still in the face of cruelty was its own kind of movement forward. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness still matters even in the brightest hours of the day, please take a moment to engage with this video. Your likes, shares, and comments help these stories reach others who need them. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the city, Elias stepped outside, breathing in the warmth of the afternoon. He hadn't exposed them to the world. He had exposed them to themselves. And in doing so, he reclaimed something far more valuable than revenge. Before this story ends, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or a moment when kindness changed everything for you. Because sometimes, the most powerful secrets are not about who we are, but about how we choose to treat others when we think no one is listening.